Kinsale, it's a real treat to be able to speak with you tonight. Thank you so much for being here with us at Speaking Volumes. We're excited to introduce you to the Pongo community. Let's dive in, shall we? So at Pongo, our work is right at the intersection of poetry, youth mental health, and systemic injustice. And we're working with young people who are in confined settings, like prisons, who are experiencing harm at the systemic and interpersonal level, and also coping with past experiences of trauma. And so we see poetry writing as an effective way of supporting their self-expression and healing. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the role that poetry plays in your life, and what the writing and creative process offers you.
Sure, thank you. Yacht she Kinsale Drake in the share, not odd and Trachin in the shle, Bilagana, Bashish Chi, Eshi Hadashache, Bilagana Dashanale, Akut Egot San in the shle. Hi, my name is Kinsale Drake. I just introduced myself and told everyone where I was from. I'm calling in from Navajo Mountain, Utah, and this is really where my love for poetry began. So, as a young person, I spent a lot of time kind of moving back and forth between where I went to school and where my mom's family was from. So, they're from Navajo Mountain, and I'm Navajo, and so I'm also mixed. So, I had the kind of hybrid experience that I think a lot of mixed kids have and a lot of Native kids have in particular, which is that, family is spread out
Mhm.
as a result of whether that's colonization, whether that's education, you want, better access to education, things like that. Um, and poetry for me, I think I first was formally introduced to it in school as something that wasn't from my background or my heritage or something that was to be learned and to
Mhm.
be mastered in a way. And I loved books. I loved language. My parents loved reading to me as a kid. And so I had that ingrained pretty early on to like really appreciate books, which was a huge thing for me. As like a brown kid going to school with a lot of folks who had no idea who I was or where I came from or any idea of like, you know, s surviving genocide and being a descendant
Mhm.
of that, like just no notion of
Mhm.
that. And then being faced with that kind of everyday erasure, right? Of that kind of invisibility of a part of me that really was a huge part of like who I was and who my
Mhm.
family was and who the people I loved were. So what I realized as I got older was poetry was a part of um, where I came from, and poetry was a part of my history and a part of my heritage. It just showed up in different ways. And so,
Mhm.
one example is like oral stories. Whenever you have a conversation with a family member, and whether they're passing down a story or they're passing down knowledge, and something is really deeply felt, that is a form of poetry to me because that's using language to access memory, to access people who are beyond
Mhm.
the present, honor them. It's also using language to render something that you feel very deeply. Um, and also like that kind of moment where you have a deeper understanding of the person that you're talking to, right? You
Mhm.
like see them more fully. To me, that's like poetics kind of working on an everyday
Mhm.
basis. And so when I got older, I would learn that more and feel more affirmed as a poet. But for me, I think when I started to really see it as a tool was when I was about 16
Mhm.
and I had been writing kind of like rhyming things in my free time and did not think of myself as a poet. But I read some other work by Indigenous poets for the first time and Indigenous writers in general. So this was like Louise Erdrich, Joy Harjo, like
Mhm.
Native women basically who had come before me, who I wasn't being taught in school and who they weren't
Mhm.
on the curriculum. I had to find them on my own. But once I did, it was like a whole world had opened up.
Mhm.
And I suddenly had the tools to understand myself, to
Mhm.
understand my place in the world better, and to understand that poetry was a way of making sense of that and also documenting that struggle. Like it
Mhm.
was okay to be vulnerable, like to be incredibly vulnerable on the page
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that's not only a space for you to kind of document what's happening and to make sense of what's going on up here, but
Hmm.
also, in your heart and in your spirit. Um, and also by seeing that on the page and knowing someone else had written that, I felt way less alone. And
Hmm.
so poetry is also to me deeply rooted in community, um,
Hmm.
whether that's in the present, sharing with other poets, having friends who care about, the same things that I do. And then
Hmm.
across time, that sense of not feeling alone is
Hmm.
so important for especially people who have experienced and are coping with trauma, um,
Hmm.
kids who are experiencing isolation, racism, classism, things that are made to make them feel alone. And
Hmm.
basically, how I think of that now is poetry helps me understand how that aloneness is a tool of colonization. It's a tool of systemic oppression to
Hmm.
make us feel weaker. And so
Right.
poetry makes me feel strong.
Hmm. Thank you. Oh, there's so much I want to bounce off that. Well, yeah, when you were talking about not thinking of yourself as a storyteller, or not thinking that that's part of your own tradition or your family's tradition, yeah, I think back to like, car rides with my dad, and like he would be sort of singing these songs I didn't know where they came from, only to later in life come to learn that like there are these protest anthems from his youth, and like there are all these histories and politics that I was not privy to. I was just like, why does he keep humming this song? So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Um, I like that you mentioned that poetry helps you feel stronger and sort of less alone, because a key part of our work at Pongo is connecting young people with trained adult mentors who support them in writing poetry and expressing themselves. And so I want you to think back to the first person or community of people that encouraged you to explore poetry and writing. Could you describe what that experience was like and what impact it had on you?
Yeah, without a mentor, like without somebody there to encourage me, I would probably have never been a poet. Like
Hmm.
there were several moments in my life where someone older than I was or more experienced like stepped in and encouraged me, like
Hmm.
actively, sat me down and was like, This has a lot of promise. Like you should
Hmm.
apply to this writing workshop or you should do this, things I had never thought to do,
Hmm.
um, either because I didn't know it existed or because I didn't believe in myself enough. Like I just didn't
Hmm.
think that that was something that I could do,
Right.
professionally. And so, yeah, I had a teacher, again, when I was 16, I had a teacher who told me to submit to like this one award. And I was like,
Hmm.
there's no way. I was like, there's no way
Hmm.
I'm just going to do it, but there's no
Right.
way I'm going to get
Hmm.
it. And I did, and it changed my whole life. Like it
Hmm.
was like it opened up a whole world for me to understand that there's a whole ecosystem out there. You know,
Hmm.
there are other young writers of color who
Hmm.
are facing similar or connected struggles in their communities. And it validated, my feeling that writing and poetry, specifically poetry, does
Hmm.
work. Because I think a
Hmm.
lot of folks, I think namely like Anglo writers,
Hmm.
like to think of poetry as a dying art form,
Hmm.
which like which is so ridiculous because it's like it's
Hmm.
been around longer than you've even been like teaching us in school, Anglo
Hmm.
poetry. So of course it's still going to be around.
Hmm.
And so that sense of like vivacity, that sense of like survivance, as Gerald Visner calls it, which is not just survival, but a thriving, like
Hmm.
seeing the ecosystem of poetry and getting excited about it was really important. And all that started was just because like somebody believed in me, right? Like it was
Hmm.
having that mentorship, having someone I could ask questions, like learning to be unafraid to ask questions too, because I was so
Hmm.
fearful as a kid. Like I was
Hmm.
so fearful to do something wrong. I was
Right.
so fearful to make a mistake. And a lot of
Hmm.
that, I talk to, young poets now, and a lot of that stems from like their home life or, the trauma that they experienced, which is like
Hmm.
you're afraid to mess up because if you make a mistake, it has consequences.
Right.
And, you're afraid to ask questions, you're afraid to do something wrong because then you're going to be the only brown kid in the class. Like you already are
Hmm.
seen as less capable. And
Hmm.
then you have to ask questions, right? So it's like it really helped me speak up and
Hmm.
also I guess like just feel like I could do what I wanted to do. So like a
Hmm.
mentor makes you, it just makes you feel less
Hmm.
isolated as well.
Right. Yeah, what you said reminds me of a conversation I had with a Pongo youth writer a couple of years ago, just talking to them about what their program experience was like. And they described that relationship with the mentors who came in. And the way they described it was, I didn't see judgment in their eyes. Like they just saw me as another person, particularly for young people who are defined by a mistake one mistake that they made, or maybe the worst moment in their life. That's really powerful. And so I appreciate you sharing more about the teacher that was so instrumental for you.
Mhm.
So in 2024, you released The Sky Was Once a Dark Blanket, your debut poetry collection. Get it wherever books are sold. It's fantastic. And in terms of themes and subject matter, there's a whole lot in there. You explore relationships of reciprocity and attraction with the natural world, family and multi-generational relationships, colonialism, music, one of my favorites, and a lot more. And so I'm wondering if you could share more about the themes and subject matter that you return to both in this collection and your writing more broadly, and what you're trying to wrestle with and process through your work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that book. It's like my baby. It's like my first project. Um, and it was really coming from a place where I usually tried to write poetry from, which is like one, to understand,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
understand myself, my
Hmm.
relationships, my place in the world, right?
Hmm.
In the shadow of colonialism, in the shadow of settler colonialism, like how that impacts my personal life and also
Hmm.
like, seeing those connections throughout time and throughout space.
Hmm.
Um, it just is a really great, like poetry just really helps me break that down and make it very straightforward. And also like
Hmm.
evokes that kind of emotional stake where someone reading it can easily understand or access it a little better.
Hmm.
Um, so some of those poems were definitely more of like they were more history oriented because of course
Hmm.
I we have to look to history to understand the present and move into the future.
Hmm.
I was reading, I think reading is a huge part of writing. I was reading
Hmm.
a ton of Native women writers, and a lot of those poems are in conversation with some of those Native poets because
Hmm.
I think I think in like mainstream literature, there's such a push for originality, but I love that in
Hmm.
like our communities, there really is no such thing as that. Like it's really
Hmm.
just you take what you learn
Hmm.
and voices across time have
Hmm.
knowledge that we need. That's like
Right.
a part of like our communities and what makes us so strong is honoring that past and bringing it into the present and passing it on to the
Hmm.
future. That's what colonization has attempted to disrupt because they
Right.
see that as dangerous.
Hmm.
And so kind of, calling out those themes and carrying forward some of that knowledge, but also
Hmm.
a central part of that collection was like deeply felt moments or observations, interactions with the natural world, with family, with memory, with land, with music, how all
Hmm.
of them come together and really create moments of beauty and moments of joy, like even amidst
Hmm.
heartbreak. Like all of those
Right.
things can exist at one time. And
Hmm.
so, specifically, I think when I was coming into poetry as well, it was to maybe not actively combat, but yes, to combat the tragic narratives that
Hmm.
people have of Native peoples,
Right.
which ultimately are a means to erase us or confine us.
Hmm.
And so some of my poetry in that collection, the whole collection in general, is to break or attempt to and help break Native
Hmm.
peoples from how people think about us.
Right.
Right? And that's like
Hmm.
my job with Indian Girls Book Club is like
Hmm.
showing this beautiful constellation of Native writers, like more voices, right? It's not just me. You can't just read this book and think you know
Hmm.
everything. Like that's
Hmm.
literally the voice of the book is also telling you you can't do that, right? The voice
Right.
of the
Right.
book is inherently imperfect.
Hmm.
And that's part of being human. That's the human experience. And
Hmm.
so there was a lot of different parts, but I think they all find harmony
Hmm.
with these different poems and these different songs that are speaking to each other and doing the work of conjuring,
Hmm.
sometimes combat,
Hmm. Right. Right.
and
Hmm.
then sometimes just celebration. Like, boom, three
Hmm.
C's. I just came up with
Right.
that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Conjuring, combat, and celebration.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Kinsale. It's been great to speak with you. Again, I encourage everyone to purchase The Sky Was Once a Dark Blanket and to keep track of all of your work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.